Right, let the transition begin. The General Services Administration sent this letter ascertaining that Joe Biden is the election winner. That means the transition process can officially start. In her letter, GSA Administrator Emily Murphy wrote that she came to that decision independently, but President Trump then tweeted that he recommended that she make that decision, writing in his tweets that he told her team to do what needs to be done with regard to initial protocols and that he's told his team to do the same. So this all follows a standoff that started more than 2 weeks ago after CBS News and other media organizations projected Biden as the winner. The GSA's decision came hours after Michigan certified Biden's victory and 2 days after a judge dismissed a Trump campaign lawsuit aimed at stopping Pennsylvania's certification. Meantime, President-elect Biden is moving forward with the transition. He named some key cabinet picks. We told you about Antony Blinken as Secretary of State yesterday. Now that is confirmed. Biden selected Alejandro Mayorkas for DHS Secretary, Linda Thomas Greenfield for UN Ambassador, John Kerry as Climate Envoy, Avril Haines as DNI, and Jake Sullivan as National Security Advisor. He also named a Treasury Secretary, former Fed Chair Janet Yellen. She would become the 78th Secretary of the Treasury and the first woman to have the job.